Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how we can allow a player to change the position of UI elements such as a health total or maybe how much gold they have using an options menu that we create inside of the game. So in this scene I've already gone ahead and set up a very basic GUI where we have this health total showing in the top left hand corner, and you can see a couple elements beneath it. It's got a health image and it's also got a health text. The image just to show the icon, and the text to actually show the value of the health to the player. And this is all anchored in the top left hand corner. You can see on the select transform, it's anchored up there to the top left hand corner. So what we'll be doing in this video is making it so that the player can change the anchor point to any of the corners, whether that's top left, bottom right, or top right. And very similarly, you could also say allow the player to adjust position X, position Y, and similar settings in order to tweak it a little bit further. So we're going to be doing all of those settings inside of UI control menu, which is just a game object I've set up here. It doesn't have a script yet, but it's going to be a menu that is specifically for controlling the position of the GUI. Obviously, you'll need a more extensive menu system with like a main menu, and then you come into this menu. You can see some of my other tutorials on creating a more complicated menu system for that. But we're solely focused on moving the GUI through an options menu. And so in order for this to work, we're going to need to create a new script for this UI control menu, because right now it's just a panel with a background. So in my folder for the scripts, I'm going to right click here and add in a new C# script. I will name it the same thing with the object, just for some consistency. And I will drag this script in to the UI control menu as a mono behavior script that we can go ahead and edit. So I'm going to edit this script inside of Visual Studio. And this script is going to need a reference to the GUI because we're trying to modify the GUI, so we need to know about those GUI elements. Now you'll notice here for the GUI, I already went ahead and created a very simple script here. And this GUI script does nothing but get a reference to the health GUI component, which is this showing up in the top left hand corner, but you'd probably have more elements here inside of the script. So it's just to manage all the GUI elements in one place. And then the health GUI just has references to the image and text. So in the UI control menu, we want to get a reference to that GUI. So I'm going to call this preview GUI. And the reason for that is that I'm imagining in this scene, it's more like the main menu of the game, where we're not setting the GUI directly, but we're gathering all of the settings for the GUI so that when we're in the actual game, it'll show properly. So this is really just for rendering the preview using the settings that the player picks. So you could even rename this GUI to preview GUI if that makes more sense to you. Now in the UI control menu, I'm also going to want a drop down where I can select which corner this element can be set to. Basically, if it's in the top left hand corner, the bottom left, or so on. So one really good way we can present a drop down menu to the player is by using enum variables, which will basically take a string name and assign that to an integer value. And then in the actual code, whatever name is passed in can basically be used to determine what kind of setting is actually being assigned to it. Even though the setting itself isn't a string, we use a string to represent that setting. So I'm going to call this location. And there's going to be 4 options here. So top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. Now this just creates the enum type. We actually need to create a field for it as well. So I'm going to do public health location, And we could default this to a value. So let's just do health location.top left. So by default, it'll be anchored into the top left. Okay, so now it's showing up in the inspector. We'll make this health location dropdown show as an actual UI component in a little bit. But before we get to that, let's actually make the method so that depending on what the health location is set to, the GUI health location element will actually change its anchor position. So let's call this method public void update health anchor position. If you can think of a more compact name than that, then please go ahead. And we can pass in a health location as a parameter here. Alternatively, you don't necessarily have to pass it in as a parameter. You could just use the value set in the class itself, but it depends what makes more sense to you depending on how you're going to be designing this. But in any case, we need to give reference to that health location. So with the health location, I think a good way of solving this here for a small list of options would be a switch statement. So we take a switch statement, we pass in the health location, and then depending on what case of health location, which will be top left, top right, bottom left, and so on, then we will change something about the GUI. So let's set up all of these cases here. Okay, and now depending on what setting we have passed in, we want to change the GUI. So with the preview GUI, we're going to get reference to its health GUI element. And on the health GUI, we want to get access to the rect transform component. And we're going to want to do stuff with that. But because in all cases, we're going to want access to the same rect transform, we can actually move this part outside of the switch statement, only calling the method once. So let's say health rect transform is equal to preview GUI, health GUI, get component rect transform. So with the health rect transform, we're going to want to change its anchored position, and we're also going to want to change its pivot point. So in order to change the anchored position and the pivot of the rect transform, we're going to want to be modifying these values here. So min, max, pivot. These are all normalized to the shape of the parent object. So this preview GUI is stretched to our entire interface. It probably would be in most cases. And if we set, let's say, the anchor to 1 over here, making the min x position of the anchor all the way to the right, then it automatically assigns the actual position up here based on the parent object. So we don't even need a reference to the parent object here. We just need to change these values to either 0, 1, or -1, depending on what positions we want. So we can see the anchored position takes a vector 2. So we need a new vector 2. And this is the top left position. So the anchored position should be at x of 0, and then y of 1, I believe, because higher is and 1, I believe, for the y position, because when you go up on the screen, that's talking about a higher y position, and lower is negative. So in theory, I think that should work. We'll of course test it later on. And then the pivot as well, I believe, takes a vector 2. So yes, vector 2. So we also want the pivot to be 0 and 1. And actually, we don't even need to do the work of figuring out these values, because we can just test it in this inspector interface. So we can see top left for pivot and the anchor is 0 and 1 on both the min and the max. And then top right is 1, 1 for all of them. So let's go ahead and update that in here. And now that I think about it, I think we might actually want to be setting the anchor max and anchor min. So I'm going to do that, and we'll see if it works, if we need to go back to anchor position or not. So anyway, this is a new vector 2 with values 1 and 1. And the same thing for the max and pivot. So I'm just going to copy that. Let's do anchor max, anchor pivot. Oh, no, sorry, just pivot. And let's copy this up here, change the values. So we want 0, 1, 0, 1, and 0, 1. And let's get the values for the bottom left-hand corner. And let's get the values for the bottom left-hand corner here. So it's zeros all the way across. So let's copy this and change the values to 0. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. 0, 0. And then the last one should be 1, 0, but let's double check just to be sure. So changing it to the bottom right hand corner is 1, 0 all the way across. So 10, 10, 10. And just like that, I think the anchor should be able to be set here. So now all we need to do is create a drop-down menu that when one of these is selected, it actually updates the preview GUI location. Let's reset that location back to the default for right now. And let's see here, the UI control menu also needs reference to that GUI component. So I'm gonna attach the preview GUI there. And now let's create a simple UI dropdown. So UI dropdown, and we'll have this over here. So with this dropdown script, the component, we're going to want an onValue changed, where we're going to pass in the UI control menu. And the UI control menu is going to get passed in an integer 32. So I guess we do need to change this script just a little bit, converting an int32 into the enum value. So let's do that. Selected. We can honestly just make this, let's make this int here. So to do convert value to enum, and we'll also need to set the options here based on the options that exist in the UI control menu. So one option here would be to manually set all the options, and then when you get those values passed in, like which would be like the first option would represent 0 and then 1 and then 2. You could take those values and then update the location based on that. But I'm going to do something a little bit more fancy here. I'm going to delete all of these default options, and then I'm going to load options as the game actually loads based on the enum that's set here in this UI control menu script. So in order to set these options manually, we just need to get access to this drop-down component inside of the UI control menu. So in UI control menu, I'm going to add public drop-down, and this is going to be the health position drop-down. We'll import drop-down from unityengine.ui. And so when this script awakes, we want it to set the values in the drop-down component. So health position drop-down is going to be equal to the health location options, but we actually need to convert that into a list here. So to convert this enum into a list of strings, we can do enum.getNames, and now we need a type. So I'm going to do the type of health location, and what does this return us? A array of strings, but we want a list of strings. So we need to create a new list of string, passing in that array of strings as the parameter. Okay, so getting the names gives us a string array, but we need to have it converted into a list of drop-down option data. But you can see here that there's a method in the drop-down class called addOptions, which takes a list of strings for options. Of course, if you just do it like this, it's not going to have the sprite associated with it. So if you wanted to have a little image associated with the option, which is possible, then you would need to probably create the option data manually and add the sprites in. But here we're just going to use a list of string. So let's see here. To create the list of strings, we're going to need to do a new list of string here. And we're going to pass in the array. And instead of doing .options equal, we're going to do addOptions, passing in this list of strings. And in theory, that should work as long as the health position is set. So if this is properly set, then we're going to add the options in. Else, let's debug, log some warning out to the user or the players. So, well, probably the editor of the game, not the players. They don't have a debug log console. So anyway, debug log warning, health position drop down, not set. And then that should be okay for now. So what's happening in this script now is when it awakes inside of the game, regardless of whether this game object is enabled or not, onAwake is going to get called, and it's going to add the options based on the enum to the dropdown list. And then those values are going to get passed in here. And then each of these string values is going to be associated with an integer value, which is going to be perfectly aligned with what's up here. So top left is 0, top right is 1, bottom left is 2, and then bottom right is 3. As long as we don't assign any custom values, you can hover over them and see, yeah, that's how it works. So now we just need to convert the selected integer back into the actual health location. So what we can do here is health location is equal to casting health location on the selected integer value. I think that works anyway. And yes, it does. So basically we take the integer, and now we're getting the enum representation of that. We pass that into the switch. So now whatever value is selected by the player inside the game is going to be set here in this method. But one thing we also want to do here is to make this not update only inside the script, but actually to update the health location value that the control menu stores too. So we're permanently changing the health location in this script, and we're also using that value to update the locations of the preview GUI. I think we might be able to go ahead and start testing it now, so let's actually hit play here. Okay, so you can see here a dropdown hasn't been set, and we had that log warning there to kind of help us solve that. So that just means we need to drag in this dropdown here for everything to work properly. So let's go ahead and hit play one more time here. And we can see we got the enum values actually loading up here. So if we change this to a different value, hopefully we'll see something change. Okay, so the value's been selected. Did it update in the control script? No, it did not. You know what? I think I know why that is. I don't believe we set the method here. Okay, yep. So onValueChanged is currently doing nothing. So we need to reference the control, the UI control menu script, and choose update health anchor position. So now the value is getting passed in there properly, and we can try that one more time. So let's try this. Top right. Ooh, nice. Bottom left, bottom right, top left. And those values hopefully are also being associated in this value up here, which we may or may not want to make public, because the idea is we change it in the game, not in the inspector. So you could make this a variable that does not show up in the inspector if you want. But the values are being properly changed. So obviously this is really cool, and you can repeat this same process with any GUI interface items. If you want to change like the manual position X, like the offset values, then back in the script you would just add a UI field here that allows you to input some number. Maybe it's a slider bar, and then you take that slider bar value and you use that to adjust the positions of each of the UI elements. And the same way we set the anchor position, instead you would just come in here, and for the health rect transform, you do something like, let's see, do they have position here? Position X equals whatever number that you passed in. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you can use the options menu in order to manipulate the interface, or allow the player to change the interface, customizing the position, the size of things, all that other kind of stuff. One thing I do need to point out though is that in order for these values to save permanently in your game, as you're switching between scenes, you will need to take this data, like the positions that you've set in the options menu, and actually serialize that to a save file, whether that's temporary or a permanent file. But that's a whole nother story, and I do have some videos on that as well. But as far as controlling the interface through a UI menu, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys learned a lot. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content.